Welcome into the Heat Report by Chat Sports as we are 5 days away from the NBA trade deadline on February 6th. And on today's show, we're going to break down the latest around Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. But make sure you are subscribed to the channel because on Thursday, we will be live for the trade deadline. Even if Butler is traded beforehand, I am going to be live on the Heat Report reacting to all the news, rumors in the association, and how it affects the Miami Heat. And if Butler isn't traded, well, we'll certainly be on trade watch up until that deadline. All right, we're going to get into the latest surrounding Butler because there really hasn't been any momentum this weekend on a potential trade. And I got to be honest, maybe the De'Aaron Fox stuff has kind of hindered that because it seems like it's more likely at this point that De'Aaron Fox is traded first than Jimmy Butler because he seems to want to go to San Antonio. The Spurs want to get him. They have the capital to get it done. It's just all about if they could find common ground. And including Stephon Castle, not including Stephon Castle, how many draft picks, how big of a trade does this become? Because there's been a couple Heat reporters like Greg Sylvander over at 5 Reasons Sports Network that is theorizing and hearing that there could be a 6-team trade involved, and Miami isn't even involved on those 6 teams, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler today, but I did find it interesting that Fox might be traded before Jimmy Butler because I do want to bring up this quote that Charania shared on ESPN's NBA Countdown on Friday night, saying that the Suns and Warriors are shaping up as the 2 likeliest landing spots for Jimmy Butler in a trade. The Heat have been engaged in conversations with both the Warriors and Suns over the last several days and last week. Also, a couple of other teams in the hunt as well. Now, this is not really anything completely new, just kind of hammering home, and Anthony Chiang of the Miami Herald also reported pretty much the same thing on early Saturday morning. So it feels very likely that the Warriors are maybe the biggest threat to Phoenix in acquiring Jimmy Butler. Now, the fascinating thing about the Golden State Warriors, and we'll talk about the latest going on around them because it affects Miami, is that they have a lot of options that they are mulling over in terms of what to do at the deadline. Steve Kerr and company have already said that they are going to have to make a move because they just simply can't stand pat with how their season is going. So I do expect the Warriors to make some sort of blockbuster trade, whether it's for Jimmy Butler or maybe it's with the Chicago Bulls where they could get Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic. It is very reported and very rumored that the Warriors are trying to figure out which player would be a better fit in terms of their roster, but also looking at what they would have to offer in a specific trade between LaVine, Jimmy, and Vucevic. Obviously, Vucevic is going to be the lowest acquired asset there because his contract isn't as large as LaVine's or Jimmy Butler's, but is Vucevic going to that center spot, moving Draymond to the 4 and keeping the rest of that 1, 2, 3 on that Warriors roster, moving things to make them a title contender? Probably not. And if I'm going to be transparent, and you look at the Warriors roster, I don't think Zach LaVine moves the needle for them as well. Like, a LaVine-Curry backcourt sure has a lot of offensive firepower, but in a trade for LaVine, they would have to include Andrew Wiggins' salary, and now you lose one of your key defensive pieces in the perimeter on the wing, and I'm just not so sure that team would be able to win. The reason why I think Jimmy Butler makes so much sense for Golden State and why have I always labeled them as the number 1 kind of landing spot for Jimmy, and it makes sense for Golden State, is because if you trade Wiggins, you trade first-round draft capital for Jimmy Butler, you're getting someone on the same timeline as Steph Curry, you're getting someone who, if he wants to go to Golden State, which it sounds like he would be very much open to playing for the Warriors, would be able to be that wing kind of defender, but also initiator in the half court to give Steph Curry some lifting off of his shoulders. I think Jimmy Butler fits with the Golden State Warriors quite well, but there is a report out there that Steph Curry and Steve Kerr are unsure of Jimmy Butler's fit. And I'm not so sure it's the kind of unsureness of that fit is more or less basketball related, but more actually about how he would fit in that locker room and if Golden State would actually pay him that 2-year Supermax extension that he has been looking for from the Miami Heat, which then obviously translated to these trade talks. Before we continue more on today's video, let me know your thoughts. Where does Jimmy Butler get traded? Will it be Phoenix? Will it be Golden State? Will it be a surprise team like Memphis or New Orleans that we will be talking about here in just a second, but let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. All right, before we translate over to some talk about a potential New Orleans Pelicans, I do want to quickly mention the Phoenix Suns once again, because I still don't know if they are going to be able to find a trade. I really don't think that they're going to find a Beal Suitor. Now, the Sacramento Kings thing makes it interesting. I'm not going to lie, because if the Kings truly do want win-now pieces in return for De'Aaron Fox, maybe there becomes a multi-team trade where the Suns actually can find Beal going to Sacramento, and maybe Miami does not net De'Aaron Fox in this hypothetical, which would be quite the bummer if the Heat were involved in a Jimmy Butler, De'Aaron Fox multi-team deal, and Fox wasn't coming to Miami. It would actually suck quite a lot, if we're going to be honest. But maybe Beal ultimately goes to Sacramento, and Jimmy Butler ends up in Phoenix, and Miami just ultimately gets some expiring contracts and pieces like a Trey Lyles, like a Harrison Barnes, and multiple first-round picks. It's not my favorite idea, there's no question about that, but it's something that I think could actually come to fruition over the next 5 days. But if the Phoenix Suns want to get Jimmy, man, they're going to have to find a Beal Suitor very, very quick. All right, before we get more and actually talk about the New Orleans Pelicans side of things, which has been fascinating, we are sponsored by Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform out there. All you do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. And the big game in football is almost here. Don't miss out on the last football game of the season with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the big game. Prize Picks is also giving away a free pick for the big game. Patrick Mahomes, more than a half a passing yard. All you got to do is pair that up with one other correct stat projection, and you can win real cash. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Think Steph Curry's going to get more than 4 threes. Think Tyler Hero's going to have more than 20 points. Play your way on Prize Picks. So download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get back to talking about Jimmy, and let's talk about the New Orleans Pelicans, because Marc Stein had an interesting report over the last 48 hours saying that New Orleans, meanwhile, has essentially joined Golden State, Milwaukee, and Memphis in a grouping of teams that have all contemplated trading for Jimmy Butler, even though he is not angled to land with any of them. We all know that Jimmy wants to angle to go to the Phoenix Suns, but New Orleans is an intriguing team because it has been widely reported over the last 6 months that their top priority before Thursday's trade deadline is to find a way to get off of Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram has an expiring $36 million contract. He, in New Orleans, has not been able to find common ground on an extension, and it does not sound like the Pelicans are going to extend Brandon Ingram. So they want to move off of that expiring and not just lose Brandon Ingram for nothing. And I'm not so sure if the Pelicans are interested in actually landing Jimmy Butler, but more or less trading in that Jimmy Butler deal where Jimmy goes to, say, a Phoenix Suns, the Pelicans get some players. Maybe it is a Bradley Beal. I don't know. I don't like that fit for them, but maybe it's something in that regard. And then they move off Brandon Ingram, and maybe he comes to Miami. And I got to be honest, this is slowly becoming, if the Pelicans are actually involved in discussions in this Jimmy Butler trade saga, my #1 priority. Do I think Brandon Ingram's fit in Miami next to Bam, Ware, and Hero is out of this world? No, there are a lot of questions because Brandon Ingram is an isolation scorer. He is someone that isn't that good at spacing the floor. He lives in the mid-range, lives in getting to the rim, and I'm not so sure how that would flow in the Heat's offense with obviously Bam and Ware being able to space the floor a little bit, but not as effectively and efficiently in terms of forcing opposing defenses to leave the paint. And then we know Bam Adebayo lives in that 15-foot range and in. So I'm skeptical of the fit, but when you start to look down the line of other Jimmy Butler trade packages, do you want Wiggins in picks? Do you want Bruce Brown in picks? No one wants Bradley Beal in picks. And when you start to think of Brandon Ingram and maybe Herb Jones coming to Miami, I think I become a big fan of that. Herb Jones and Brandon Ingram, you combine those two salaries, it comes out to exactly the same amount of money as Jimmy Butler, $48 million. Ingram making 36. Herb Jones making 12. Now, the one thing with Ingram, as I mentioned, he is a free agent this upcoming offseason, so it would be an expiring $36 million deal. But to me, Miami could then see how they view Brandon Ingram. Does he fit in the locker room? Does he fit with Hero and Bam? And if they deem that he does, well, then they can give him an extension for maybe 4 years, $160 million, something similar to the OG Anunoby contract, which is where I think he will ultimately land in free agency, because there's really no max slots available for him to get $50+ million unless he re-signs with New Orleans, and it doesn't want them to do that. But if you don't want that, well, then it just becomes a $36 million expiring. You're going to get a lot of exceptions in the off seasons, the biannual, the mid-levels. You could sign someone at $14 million in free agency, sign someone at $9 million, sign someone at $5 million, and adjust your roster for next year with still being able to keep flexibility for 2026. But what's worse here? I mean, what? Is Andrew Wiggins a better fit than Ingram? But his contract runs through 26-27. Bruce Brown, I think if you could land Brandon Ingram in a return for Jimmy Butler, you have to do it. And Herb Jones is someone that I've really liked. He is an excellent point of attack wing defender. He's lengthy, he's athletic. He struggles in terms of spacing the floor, only shooting about 31% from threes, but the Heat's developmental system in terms of shooting has been able to turn a lot of shooters around. So maybe they can get Herb up to a 36-37% three-point shooter. He's simply just a better version of Haywood Highsmith, if we're going to be honest. And maybe Haywood goes out in this deal if it's a multi-deal contract and Herb lands in Miami. But they're similar play styles. Herb is more athletic than Haywood. He's better with the ball in his hands. They're probably the same level of defender, but Haywood's got that advantage in three-point shooting. But I love Herb's athleticism and ability to attack the cup and finish around the rim way better than Haywood Highsmith. That's an intriguing idea to me, and I would love Brandon Ingram and Herb Jones finding their way to Miami in a Jimmy Butler trade, even if it does not net the Heat a ton of draft capital in return. I'm going to round out the show with this. I'm going to keep it very brief on this subject because I don't even want to talk about it. But Ian Begley, who is tapped in with SNY, has a lot of sources in New York. He's a credible reporter. Reported multiple times over the last week that he was told that the Heat had some level of interest in Julius Randle, a potential trade, during this past offseason, and they currently continue to have interest in Randle during this Butler saga, that the Heat and Timberwolves have at least touched base about Butler permutations. You're talking about a multi-team deal here where Julius Randle would end up in Miami. Not going to talk about this long because I can talk about it probably for a full 15, 16 minutes, just Julius Randle himself. But this would be an absolute disaster. I would hate Julius Randle in Miami. Seriously, think about it. If you have Randle in Miami, what does he do? Who is he coming off the bench? Is he going to be a sixth man? He's not going to want to do that because I'm not starting him over a Bam or Ware. I'm committing to those two as your 4-5 duo of the future, and you've got to continue to start them. So is Randle coming off the bench? No. I also hate the way he plays basketball. He is not a winning type basketball player. There is nobody that screams less Miami Heat basketball, in my opinion, than Julius Randle. You could have potentially sold me on a Randle-Bam front court in terms of fitting together slightly a year and a half ago, but now that Kel'el Ware is thrown in the mix, it makes absolutely no sense. I would be fuming, I would be livid if Julius Randle is wearing a Miami Heat uniform post-trade deadline, as that is the player you get back for Jimmy Butler. I would be so upset that I might boycott a week of Heat basketball games. I'm being so dead serious. It would be the worst thing that the Heat could possibly do before the deadline on February 6th. All right, that's going to round out today's show. Like I said off the top, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you have your notifications turned on because when a Jimmy Butler trade happens, we're going live. We're breaking it down for you. But from now until February 6th deadline, we'll have you covered with videos every single day. And we will be live later tonight as well for a Spurs Heat watch party. We'll be live on Tuesday for the watch party against the Bulls, Wednesday against the Sixers, and then live on Thursday for the deadline. So join us because this is probably going to be the most exciting week of Miami Heat content we have ever had at the channel, so don't miss out.